Hi, First Hampshire. On Wednesday, the House recessed for the month of August. But before we did, we passed some really important legislation, like the FY20 budget. However, one of the things that we didn't do that we really needed to was to take up education funding reform, or the Promise Act. I'm really disappointed that we didn't get to that legislation before recess because now we're going to have to wait until fall, and we all know education funding reform really can't wait. It is true that the FY20 budget included increases for education funding reform. However, and this is a big however, the way that affects different cities and towns is huge. So I want to take a little bit of time to talk about Northampton as an example and what the education funding increases look like for us, and to walk through some key points to help you in your advocacy around the Promise Act.
So here's the good news that everyone is celebrating. The foundation budget went up by 5%, but there's a catch. The state uses something called wealth metrics to determine how much of that comes from the state and how much comes from local funding. So for Northampton, both Chapter 70 and unrestricted government aid went up by about 1%, which means the state expects Northampton to increase its local funding by 4%. Even worse, that 1% the state is giving us is minimum state aid because Northampton is what we call a hold harmless district. It works out to be about $30 per student. For some districts, that local funding is augmented by money the city receives from school choice. That is true for Northampton, which is anticipated to receive about $1.2 million in school choice tuition, less than in previous years, but more than the roughly $500,000 that we will pay out. School choice is an important revenue source for many districts, but when state aid is limited, this sadly encourages school districts to compete with one another for students, when we should instead be focused on improving the quality of education in all districts. While Northampton is still in the black when it comes to school choice tuition that it receives, this figure is trending downwards. Something a lot of people are celebrating this year was the increase in reimbursements for charter school tuitions. However, when we look at the preliminary numbers, Northampton is expected to get $11,656 more than in fiscal year 2019 for charter school tuition reimbursements from the state, but we will pay $81,313 more in charter school tuitions. Here's the real problem. That increase is not due to more students going to charter schools. In fact, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education estimates that only 3 more Northampton-based students will go to charter schools than last year. Instead, the difference is due to the increase in the foundation budget. Northampton's Chapter 70 money is used to calculate the amount of tuition we pay for any student who decides to attend a charter school, and an additional sum is added to that figure called the above foundation amount. That means the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education adds together a state and local contribution to determine what the city of Northampton has to pay to charter schools. In other words, the more money we get in Chapter 70, the more money we pay to charters. So what do we do about this? It is, first of all, essential that we pass the Promise Act. So please keep advocating for that. However, when you write about the Promise Act, please remember to ask that it include a change to the charter school formula that both caps charter school tuition and fully reimburses cities and towns for their charter school tuition assessments. If the Promise Act passes without dealing with the charter school funding formula, cities like Northampton will just end up sending those extra funds to the charter schools because of the unfair formula. Please help us advocate for a Promise Act that is fair to everyone, one that fully funds our 10th decile districts, i.e. the poorest districts in the Commonwealth, and one that addresses the charter school funding formula by capping tuition and fully reimbursing cities and towns. Write to my office, the chairs of the Education Committee, Ways and Means, and the Speaker and the Senate President to ask for equity in education funding.
As always, please reach out to my office with any questions, and thank you so much for your advocacy.